Thank you very much. I'm glad to see you here. This is a beautiful autumn day, and I hope you will take your cookie in the end and go out and enjoy the weather before it gets too cold. Uh, Maybe we should just start. I don't know what else to say about myself. Maybe I'll say the real life part of me. In real life, I'm a dad. I have four daughters, and they are ages 16 to 25, and so that's what three of them have been BYU students. I actually just texted them. This is the first time in 6 years that I have not come to campus to do something and then taken one of them out to lunch, because the third one is on a mission in Canada. So this is actually, I have nobody here as family. So I'll adopt you all as my family, and we'll chat today and have some cookies. But it's great to be with you. I want to start just by talking about questions generally. We're going to talk about questions about church finances, but sometimes I find that Latter-day Saints think that maybe we shouldn't ask questions. You probably don't think that at the university. That's why we're here. We're seeking to know things. But I just want to really underscore this from kind of the best possible source. I don't know anything Jesus says more often than some version of ask, seek, knock, learn of me, come unto me. As you here at BYU strive to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, I think one of the things you will do is ask questions, because he's given us minds and he wants us to use them. Now, he also wants our heart, might, and strength and all the rest, but he definitely wants your mind involved in thinking about the world and wondering how things work. So in terms of church finances, there are a whole bunch of questions that people often ask. One of the things I've done in my work at church headquarters over the last couple of years has been to go on assignment to different places around the world and answer people's questions about church history or whatever they want to talk about. And so when they want to talk about finances, they will ask questions like the ones that we have here. And so I want to talk about today a couple of ways to prepare to answer those questions. Then we are going to answer those questions. And then I want to do a little case study for how you can go about seeking answers to questions. And I'm grateful that these ideas are forthcoming in the next issue of BYU Studies, which got me here today. So if any question you say, oh, is there a source or something, they'll be there in mailboxes and online in the next couple of weeks. So I'm excited for that. So let's start with the preparation part. And let's start by thinking this way. You have a question. My question is this about church finance, and we'll talk about the details. But before we do, let's just pause for a minute and ask a different question. What is an answer? How do you know when you have an answer? I have this question, this thing bothers me, I wonder about it, I want to get the answer. But what does the destination look like? How do you know when you get to answer land? Well, if you go in the scriptures, one of the things that I have found is that it talks about answers with these kinds of words: light and life and warmth. In Alma 32, when he says to do that experiment and plant the seed and grow your faith, he stops talking about seeds in the middle and he says, this is light. That's what you got from this experiment. You got light. And then Jesus promised Joseph Smith in our day that the light we get from heaven will grow brighter and brighter until it becomes a perfect day. And so in practice, we've found that there are 6 parts of an answer. And when you get all of them, you feel that light. You say, oh, I get it. It all fits together. And I've got an answer to my thing. And many times, I've heard people say, well, I went to my bishop and we talked about this thing and we talked for 3 hours and he didn't answer my question. And what often happens is you maybe did 3 or 4 or even 5 of these things, but not all of them. And when you get them all is when they all fit together. And so I want to introduce them in the context of church finances today. And I'll share how we can use this to approach our questions. But before I do, I want to show you where we have described this process for you in the Gospel Library app. One thing that happens when we talk about the church or its finances or its history is people sometimes wonder if we're hiding things. You've probably heard that. You go online and find that we're hiding things. I'm here to tell you that yes, we do hide things. And one of the best places we have found to hide them is in the Gospel Library app. Nobody will ever find them if we put them in the Gospel Library app. All right, you're good. You're laughing. I'm glad that you got that. I told you, I've got 4 daughters. We're fluent in sarcasm in our house. This is how we talk about stuff. So let me show you the hiding place. And you can pull out your phone if you want. This is in Sunday school. Go ahead, pull it out, main screen, choose topics and questions. When you get in there, right at the top, you'll see this one about seeking answers to questions. And then it gives you these principles for seeking. And now here is your secret decoder ring. There's that little circle. When we wrote it in the app, we had to use churchy language. So it had to sound like a principle to inspire you. Center your life on Jesus Christ. But that's what we're talking about here. These parts of a question. That's where it's coming from. If you do all of these things, you can get the answer. So let's start. Let's work through these parts just as our preparation to talk about church finances. First, in terms of your discipleship, in terms of your relationship with Jesus Christ, it's important to remember that he founded an institution. Sometimes we've got a popular culture version of Jesus that he's like a hippie and goes around in sandals and just wants to tear everything down. No, Jesus organized a church. He organized a structure that would take his message to the entire world. He does that in his mortal ministry. He does it again as a resurrected Lord in our day. And so Jesus is the leader of an organized structure. And the people who work in his structure, he tells them to do good work. He teaches them wise principles about planning and about taking care of the resources and getting a good return on your investment, especially if it's an investment given in sacrifice, that we care for those funds. And so the Savior is our leader in managing resources in a way that we can take his message all over the earth. And so if we're talking about that work, in some ways, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is just like every other church. We have the same kind of expenses. We have scriptures and hymnals and pamphlets, and we'll send missionaries out. We'll need a place to work, to meet, a meeting place. All of the churches on the earth have those same kinds of costs. And if you're going to run a church, you need to have the resources to do those things. But there's also a moment in our history where we stop being just like every other church from a financial perspective, and we start being different. And that happens in 1831. The church has only been organized for about a year, and Jesus gives Joseph Smith a commandment to take all of the saints and gather to Ohio. And there, Jesus promises he will give them power. And so this shift, this doctrine of gathering that says, yes, you're going to go to church on Sunday and you're going to read your scriptures, and we are going to gather the people of Christ together. And there's a place, a specific building that you're going to build. And in there, you're going to do things by which Jesus can give you power. That changes the way we have to think about finances. And the first time it hits in our history is in Nauvoo. It takes a little while. We're a small group in the beginning, but in Nauvoo, we start having thousands of converts from England who are now immigrating, crossing the ocean, and they're showing up in Nauvoo and they're saying, we're here for the gathering. And church leaders are saying, oh my goodness, where are you going to live? What job are you going to have? And so we now have to change to do these kind of long-term planning. We will buy a big plot of land and let lots of people build houses there because they've got to live somewhere when they're coming from England. We get people from England who are working in factories, and they show up in the United States and they've never worked on a farm in their life. And so we're like, what job are they going to have? Because they're not farmers. They don't know how to do farm stuff. And so we become involved in these longer term financial management, financial planning decisions. And over time, those grow to include education, where the planning that enables us to be here, our humanitarian work, our welfare work. And so our doctrine of gathering gives us a difference from other churches in the way that we have to plan and manage the resources that we have. Okay, so let's talk about another part of an answer. Another part of the answer is you. When you have a question, you bring something to it. We all do. There's no way not to. Part of the answer is I'm the person asking, and I have a reason that I want to know. And that could come from all kinds of things. It may be an experience I had. It may be something my mission companion from southern Idaho said late one night when we were supposed to be in bed, but we were having those weird, conversations, but we thought were so profound, but it stuck with me all these years. I don't know where it came. Maybe a breaking news story, maybe something on Netflix, but you show up to the question with something. Now, if we're talking about finances today in the 21st century, here are a couple of general things that people bring. We are, in the 21st century, people who are largely suspicious of big organizations, governments, hospitals, schools, right? Try and pay your registration fee somewhere on campus. You get sent to this office and that office. And, well, we have these experiences that make us suspicious. And churches are big organizations, and so is our church, 17 million people around the world. And so that's just part of who we are as 21st century people. You may also be really passionate about a specific social or community cause, may be meaningful to you, and you want more people to be involved. Here's another thing that we bring, or maybe that we don't bring. Lots of people, and this is not a criticism, it's just a description. Lots of people just don't understand finances and taxes. And one of the easiest ways to scare someone is to say the word taxes. And you're going to see this online. There'll be criticism about the church, and they'll say, oh, the church is just doing that to protect their tax-exempt status. And you don't want to admit, well, I don't really know about taxes, because who does? They're really complicated. Why would you want to know about taxes? And so on one hand, we don't know very much about taxes. On the other hand, we hate taxes. So that's the easiest way to just kind of criticize the church. Oh, they're doing that for tax reasons. And we all just kind of say, yeah, okay, that sounds scary to me. Sounds like a bad thing. They shouldn't do that. And and then it gets even more complicated, because the way financial laws work in different countries, different jurisdictions, the way something functions in the United States is likely not the way it functions in New Zealand or anywhere else that has a legal and financial system. And so we get all kinds of complexities as soon as we start talking about finances. I'll try and help with those as we keep going. Let's do another slice here. One part of getting an answer is to know how the Spirit of the Lord works. This is the channel that we have to get answers. God is sitting up in heaven and saying, you have a question, here's the channel to get an answer. It's like today, if somebody says to you, hey, I got this great TikTok I want to share with you. And if you say, oh, well, I don't have an account, I don't have a phone, there's really not a way for you to give me that. How can I see the whatever you want to show me? And that's absurd, right? But that's the same thing. If we haven't engaged the Holy Ghost as the channel, if we don't know how it works, if it's not in our pocket, if we don't know how to turn it on, if we don't know how to receive the message, then God can be answering your question. And you're like, oh, was I supposed to push you're like my grandmother. I'm supposed to push a button to make the screen light up? Sometimes that's the way we are with the Holy Ghost. And so there's a personal layer in which you can learn more about it. But on this topic, there are also ways that revelation is part of the history of our church finances. And so sometimes Jesus gives us instruction about what we should do with our time, with our property. We've been reading many of those this year in Come Follow Me. Sometimes he'll outline the procedures. Here's what happens when people donate things. Here's how you manage it. Here's how you keep a record. Here's how you make a decision. We got to those sections in the Doctrine and Covenants this year, and we're like, that is so boring. What is all this like procedural stuff? Well, that's the Savior being involved in saying, here's how you can manage resources. But there's also a way in which the Savior lets church leaders just try stuff. And sometimes this can be a little scary, but think about it. When Nephi is sent to get the plates, what does God give him through his prophet Lehi, who's also Nephi's father? What does Nephi get? What's the instruction? It's an outcome, right? Get the plates, bring them back. It is not all of the process of how to do that. All of that is up to Nephi to figure out. And so Nephi tries. Well, let me ask. Oh, that doesn't work. They threaten to kill them and they chase them away. Okay, well, let's try and buy the plates. Nephi's second idea. That doesn't work. They take the money. And so sometimes, and maybe most of the time in the history of the church, Jesus has given instructions and said, here's the outcome, take my gospel to the whole earth and use resources and take care of people. But he hasn't told us this is how you're supposed to do it. So we will see in the last 200 years, church leaders using stocks and bonds and investments and bankruptcy law and local provisions. And because they're doing what Nephi did. They're saying, I've got an outcome. How do I grow this pot of resources so I can take the gospel of the world? And they will try things. And that's okay. That's how God manages it. If we learn that about revelation, then it also informs other things like when we want to get revelation. Like maybe how, who do I want to meet? How do I want that to work? Trial and error. That's what my daughters say. The oldest one is married. The others two are still in the error phase. One of them graduated last April, and she's like, yeah, there was no guy worth dating. So I don't know, guys, but that's my message that she likes to share. She may have her standards a little bit out of sync. But anyway, that was her reaction. So trial and error. Sometimes that's how it works. And through that, you're guided to where you need to go. So let me just show you a really kind of cool illustration of this, because one of the things we're saying here is, or maybe we'll say it this way, sometimes we imagine that God just reveals, he tells prophets everything they're supposed to do. And I'm telling you that's not the way it's worked in the last 200 years. And God will give them ideas, and then they have to go just take normal stuff from the world and put it together, revelation and a stock portfolio, and they try to make something happen there. And here's one of my favorite examples. This is a gold coin that the Latter-day Saints make in Utah. The Mormon Battalion is in California when gold is discovered in 48. And so they bring gold dust back to Salt Lake City before there's even word that there's a big gold rush in 49. And so we take the gold dust and we start making gold coins. And they're $5. You can see $2, $5, $10, $20. Today, if you have one of these coins in good condition, it's worth more than $1 million. They're pure gold dust. But look at the design. Well, what strikes you as you look at that? This is Mormon money from the 1840s and 50s and 60s. What looks odd? What shouldn't be on money? Yeah, in the back. Holiness to the Lord. That belongs on temples, not on money. What else looks odd to you? To us, as 21st century people, we're like, what are you doing with your money back then, Brigham? Yeah, there's a hand clasp. Let's see, I think I have a little thing here. Yeah, so we've got a hand clasp here. What about this? Anybody know what that is? It's kind of hard because it's on a coin. That's an eyeball. there's actually an eyeball on the Salt Lake Temple. When they take the scaffolding down, you go there, there's one of those on there. It represents God, the all-seeing eye of God who sees all of creation and all the things that are happening. And then this is a little hat that symbolizes heaven and some things like that. So we have totally taken what we in the 21st century would say are kind of temple imagery and words, and we've plopped them right on our money. How dare they? You're supposed to keep sacred stuff separate from worldly stuff. And what I'm trying to say here is that that's not how Jesus thinks about it. Here's my message, take it to the whole world. Yes, Apostle Paul, you need to ride in boats, so work and get some passage. Yes, missionaries, you're going to have to fly in planes. It's going to be both, and you're going to use the resources to bring about the holiness and that kind of an outcome. All right, so another slice here is information. I want to show you another spot in the gospel library because we are really trying to hide stuff from you so we don't put it all in one place. That would be the logical thing, but we didn't do that. So you've got to look in other places. So we were here in the topics and questions. Now I want you to go to this one, church history, and then there's one in there called church history topics. One of them is all about church finances. And you can just see the history of our finances. They're right in there. There's another one in there called Church Incorporation. So this is the history of the church's corporate structure. If that's what you geek out about, then that's in there. When we were this and this arrangement, and take that to your one of your business classes when you're analyzing fiduciary duties and corporate structure. So that we've got an essay there. This slide is pulling some information from both of those so that I can share 2 points with you. Here's the first one. There were 2 times in our history where we were in really bad shape financially. And so the first one happens right up here in 1889 as part of the anti-polygamy legislation. The federal government disincorporated the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We didn't exist. Mitt Romney couldn't even say corporations are people. We were nothing. We were gone. But we still had things to do. We had the temple, we had meeting houses, we had all of those same expenses. So we had to go out and get loans. But during the 1890s, banks said to us, wait, how do we know the government's just not going to take this money? And so they were charging us 40% interest on the loans that we had to get just to keep things going. And so we're in debt until 1907. That's when we finally pay off the last interest from the loans that we started to incur in 1889. So I have a really long period of being in debt and paying these rates. We actually do pretty well in the Great Depression, comparatively. We survive, we grow, we do a couple of things. Our next problem comes in the 1950s, after World War II. Then we get really excited and we start building a lot of things. A whole bunch of meeting houses. Maybe where you grew up, there's a really old meeting house from the 1950s because we built a lot. We built more temples than ever before. Now, today, when President Nelson drops 17 temples at conference, it sounds like a little bit. But in the 1950s, when we had 5 or 6 temples, all of a sudden, we start building a temple in London, in New Zealand, in other places in the United States. And so we start building a lot of things. And we decide in the 1950s that we could take out loans to finance that construction. And so we start a deficit spending model. And then after about 10 years, church leaders say, you know what, that's not a great idea. Remember the trial and error thing. Maybe we shouldn't do that because the loans, we had a lot of loans, we had a lot of interest, the costs were growing. And so in the 1960s, we adopt a whole bunch of measures. They bring one of the apostles into the first presidency. He's a Canadian. Any Canadians here? All right. My daughter is serving in Edmonton on her mission. But N. Eldon Tanner was a Canadian businessman, really successful. He was an apostle. And so they pull him into the first presidency and they say, we got to figure all of this out. And so that's when they introduce a lot of the practices that we follow today, that there is a budget that you have to follow, your award budget, you stick to your budget, that there is, that we only build something when we have all of the money for it. So the last time President Nelson announced 17 temples, we had the money sitting there. That wasn't a loan. We weren't going to say, we're going to go out and finance this. We shifted in the 1960s to say, we will only build it. When they announced a new medical school at BYU, now that's a little slightly different because it's not church finance. There's a church stream, but we're also going to beg some of the rich donors for the medical school at BYU. So, but they'll make the forecast that they can do that. That won't be that we're going to have to go to a bank and get a loan to do this. So then we start building up a reserve and spending from those reserves. And that's a term we introduce. We'll say more about that term in a minute, but it basically means it costs this much to run the church. We have donations or income that's this much. If it's higher, that gap will go into the reserve. We'll just hold it. And then maybe next year there's a pandemic and we need more money or something. And so we have a reserve that we're working from to run our expenses. So the 1960s is not very long ago that we have started to, and there are church leaders today like President Oakes. He's an adult in the 1960s. He's growing up in the time when the church is not financially succeeding. And so this is recent in the memory of church leaders. So the church after the 1960s does the very same thing they tell you and me to do. First, they pay off all their debts. All of those loans we had taken, we pay those off. And that's by early 70s that we get those paid off. Then, if you're doing your home budget, they say, get rid of your debts, then build a little reserve. We've talked about that. Now we've got a little cushion to do things. Then the best advice is to tackle some big expenditures that are in the way. And so they go after two of them in particular. The first one comes in 1990. Before 1990, every local unit had to put together the money for their whole budget. Now, you may have heard a story in General Conference. Now it's only old people who remember this because 1990 is a long time ago. But we had a story in General Conference about a year ago where the family had saved money. I can't remember if it was a washing machine or a dishwasher. And then the bishop came in and said, we need money for our ward expenses. And the family decides not to buy the washing machine and to give that money to run the ward so that they can have young women activities and whatever that they're having. And so before 1990, Latter-day Saints would be doing fundraisers, serving chicken dinners, how they're selling popcorn, all the stuff you did in elementary school. That's what we were doing to run the ward. And in 1990, the Central Church said, we have enough of a reserve and that we're now going to take all of those local costs. So that's huge, a burden that we take off of church members. The second one happens the following year when they consolidate all of the mission expenses and have a single central system. So today, my daughter serving in Canada, we pay $400 a month, and that pays for her mission. My oldest daughter, she came back from her mission in England. She came back to BYU. You probably know this. It costs more than $400 a month to live in Provo. And so I was teasing my daughter. I said, you sure you don't want to go back on a mission? It was so much cheaper just to run you there for $400 a month because I wasn't really paying. You weren't, because the church owns the apartment that you live in, the car that you drive, all of those things. They manage your utilities. We did that. But before 1991, you were responsible for that as a missionary. And so let's say you get called to London. Your mission is going to cost you $4,000 a month. Your neighbor gets called to Bolivia. That's costing $38 a month. And so we have these big differences. And now let's say you're one of those families with 10 kids. How do you plan for that? How do you manage it when you have 3 missionaries out and they're in London and New York and I don't know where else, Tokyo? Let's do some good ones, really pile it on. So that becomes a huge expense that the church takes on. Before 1990, if you were kicked out of your apartment, well, I hope you can find a barn for tonight for cover, and then tomorrow you can go around and look for a place to live. And so that was all on you to find a place for yourself to live as a missionary. So those are 2 things that happens, and behind the scenes, the church reserve is growing. And so in the 1980s, we begin to be more organized and more systematic in investing in property. And so some of this is farms, and then some of it might be commercial property, a building, an office building, something like that. Physical property will grow at a rate of maybe 2 or 3%, the value of your property over the long haul. That's kind of your growth. Property is a really safe investment. I mean, unless there's like an earthquake or some total devastation, your property will retain its value and it will grow over the years. Pretty safe place to put your money. Now, think about the parable of the talents. There's a master, he gives money to people. Does he expect 2% growth from the people in that parable? No way, right? He's expecting 100%, right? The guy with 5 has 10, the guy with 2 has 4, and those are the ones that say, good job, you doubled what you had. I'm proud of you. And then there's the other guy who just buries it, and do you remember the criticism that he gets? Come on, man. You could have at least put it to the exchangers and earned interest or usury, right? Don't just bury it. At least put it in the stock market and earn something. And so for a while, we were earning 2 or 3%, maybe with property. And in 1997, we form an organization called Ensign Peak Advisors. And that's when we begin to invest systematically in the stock market. We had investments before, here and there, for different reasons, but they're consolidated, we invest, and we begin having a conscientious strategy. Stock market is not going to get you 100% return. This is the minimum thing, right? Can you at least put it to the exchangers and do something with the money that you have? And so over the long haul, if we go back financial data since World War II, stock market has grown, I don't know, depends on the years. 5 to 8% is a basic, some good years, maybe 10, 12, but over the long haul, you're growing pretty good in the stock market. And so in 1997, that's when we begin to invest in that way. So those are some of our, some information that we'll pull together. Couple last things to say here. One of the slices in getting an answer is identifying the errors that you have and getting rid of them. A lot of times we keep worrying about stuff and it's just wrong. And so we need to say, no, let's stop worrying about that. And so I've got a couple of here. We've already talked about the one. It should only be spiritual, not worldly. And that's just not the way it's going to work. It's not the way Jesus taught it to work. And that's just a fake choice. But you can see this online all the time. Why is the church even doing financial things? They need to stay in their lane and only do spiritual things. Well, I'm telling you, if all you want to do is meditate in the woods, you still need to buy a yoga mat and pay the state park entrance fee. So there is not a way that you do just spiritual stuff without having some way to do it. Another area you'll hear is like, well, tithing is just like taxes, and so we need accountability for our taxes. No, tithing is not like taxes. Jesus and his prophets have never taught it that way. The promise is not, if you pay your tithing, you won't go to jail. That's the promise for taxes. The promise for tithing is totally different. It's about your relationship with God. Those are not the same thing, and you can't think about them in the same way. The last one is just, you'll find all kinds of sensational stories about finances. Remember, finances are mostly boring. Yeah, mostly. But well, there's some interesting things. But mostly when there's a headline, there's a really boring story underneath. So the last part of an answer, we've been working through some of these, but we need to develop skills to think about the information that we have. And so we'll use the gift of discernment. We've already been talking about some either or, some binaries. Should they be involved in spiritual stuff or financial stuff? We have to learn that that's not a good way to think about things. We'll change our assumptions. And sometimes it's not a short story. It's a long story. We have to unpack where all of the things came from. Okay, so let's do some specific questions. I want to show you one place, a different place in the app where you can find some more help. Go to topics and questions, scroll down, and you'll get this one, Church Financial Administration. And in there, there's a long list, kind of Q&A style, of questions, and these are more modern. This is how the church administers things today. The ones I showed you earlier were the history of incorporation and things like that. And so a lot of your questions may be right here. I'm going to look at a couple of questions that we have for a couple of minutes here. One is, why does our church is a nonprofit, why does it own for-profit stuff? How is that possible? Well, here's why it's possible. Here's one error. People assume that a nonprofit cannot earn a profit, but that's not what nonprofit means. In United States law, a nonprofit organization can only return its gains to the organization, not to individual people in the organization. So a business corporation, something we typically call for-profit, that can return the gain to an individual. So you're the head of the sales team, you sell more than anybody else, you get a bonus. In a for-profit structure, I can give that back to you as an individual. If Elder Bednar gives a great talk at General Conference, we cannot give him a bonus because he's an individual. Whatever is generated can only return to the organization. That's what a nonprofit means. And so the church as a nonprofit, that's where we manage tithing and fast offerings and that kind of ecclesiastical work. And then we do own a couple of for-profit endeavors. And so as a nonprofit, you can own those. Those can return to the people who work in those spaces, but they can't be returned to individuals, if that makes sense. So let me give you some examples. Some of them begin when the Latter-day Saints moved to Utah and you're out here in the middle of nowhere, which is how I thought when I moved here from Baltimore and came as a freshman. Out in the middle of the desert, there's nothing out here. Now there's at least, I don't know, a crumble cookie or something. But when they get here in the 1840s, there are no roads, there are no utilities, there's no schools, there's nothing. And so the church gets involved in providing a lot of that infrastructure. And then over time, we give most of it, we spin it off, and they become their own kind of public utility or something like that. A few of them survive. We have an insurance company in the church that manages missionary health insurance and things like that we've retained from way back then. Some of the businesses that the church owns and operates developed as part of our mission. So we have a mission to proclaim the gospel. So we have been interested for 200 years in the technologies related to how do you share a message. We were buying printing presses in the 1830s and printing newspapers in all these random little towns. We got interested in film. We got interested in satellite dishes for a while so we could beam things around the world. We get interested in the internet. And so we have some companies. Deseret News is a newspaper we started way back in those days. And so we still have a television station and a newspaper and some of those things that developed in those ways. So all of these for-profit affiliates, they follow all of the tax laws related to that business. So they're going to pay property tax. They're going to pay income tax. They're going to pay sales tax when they purchase goods to use in that business. And so this is separate from the church as a nonprofit. And so that's the way it works in the United States. A nonprofit can own something that is operating for a profit. Okay, so here's another common question. Well, why doesn't the church disclose all their stuff? If they would just tell us all the stuff, then what are they hiding? One error here is that this really oversimplifies all of the information that we have. The church does have lots of information. And so let's say you're saying to me, Keith, I demand that the church release all of its information. That's the only way, 100% transparency. Otherwise, I'm never going to trust you. I will say, let's do it. You're in charge of the world. You paid your tithing. We have your bank account information. We'll start there. Let's release that so everybody knows and you're like, no, not that information. Oh, we've got other information. We have the address for all of these millions of children under the age of 14. We could put that out so pedophiles know where to. No, not that kind of information. So the first reaction is to say, okay, wait a minute. There's different kinds of information. And some of it we can release. Some of it we should release. Some of it we shouldn't. Some of it we're required by law to protect. If there is a living person, then we are required by laws in multiple nations to protect their privacy. And we can't disclose information about those about living people. So that's our first thing, to say, okay, no, we won't disclose everything, but so what do we disclose? It isn't an all or nothing. So let me share some. One of the things we disclose right on our website are the categories of our expenditures. We tell people, this is where our money goes. This is what we spend it on. And so we'll talk about meeting houses. There's a big section about you. There are 1 million young adults that are in the educational programs of the church across the world. We also every year publish a list of all of our humanitarian work. That will come out each March. It's now, if you just saw the church broadcast schedule, it was listed on there, the day that we're going to announce the humanitarian work. Our stock holdings are published every quarter. With the U.S. stock holdings, those are the rules with the U.S. Stock Exchange. You can go online at the Securities Exchange Commission. Every quarter you can download. This is the start of the report. We have like 1,500 companies that we own stock in. You can download this as a spreadsheet, and you can analyze the companies where the stock holdings are. We also, every April at General Conference, we have this one talk that is sometimes known as the last chance to get a snack or go to the bathroom talk. The church finance guy gets up, the audit guy, and he says, we have followed all of the procedures and we've kept everything in a budget and avoided debt and are saving. He's saying the stuff we started doing in the 1960s, we're still doing. Now that sounds really boring, so let me make it exciting. I challenge you, if you're bored in life and you're really passionate about knowing the church's finances, go into your bishop or your stake president and volunteer to be a financial auditor. This is a calling. And you can have this calling. And you know what you get to do? You will go, and men and women can have this calling. You can go, you will visit a ward clerk, and you will pull out every check that clerk signed that month. And you will check that the person is a real person and that the expense was a real expense and they have a receipt and it was budgeted the proper way. And you'll do it for like 5 hours on a Sunday afternoon. And that is going to happen like 10 million times all year long. And it rolls up into this report when he says, we have checked every expenditure that we have made and they are all in line with what we're saying we're doing with our finances. But if you really want to get to see it, I've had the calling before. It is, I'm talking really exciting. It's like one of the best callings you could ever have, to look at every check stub month after month after month. But that is a really significant disclosure that we miss because it's brief and it sounds boring, but there are literally thousands of hours of work where people are checking our expenses that get reported here. Okay, here's a question that I sometimes get. Maybe we will end with this one. This is a post online, and it says, here is the 1907 quote from Joseph F. Smith where he says, the Mormon church will one day not require tithing. He says it in general conference. Was he speaking as a man or as a prophet? Because 100 billion is more than enough. So you see the criticism here, and you'll read in there, it says, we expect to see the day when we don't have to ask for $1 of donation. And so the person posting this is drawing the conclusion. Since tithing is still required, Joseph F. Smith is a failed prophet. The church is just a greedy corporation. It's not true. I got all that in 3 seconds scrolling through my social media post. So here's what you can do. Let's check if this really is a statement. And it turns out it is. Joseph Fielding Smith is speaking in 1907 at General Conference. Now, this isn't a college class, so I won't give you a pop quiz. I'll just supply the information. You remember 1907 is when we finally paid off the debts, those 20 years of debts. So Joseph F. Smith is excited about that, and he announces at a General Conference, we have paid off our debts. That's why he's talking about it in 1907. And he does say that sentence that he's excited about paying off the debts. But in addition to that sentence that we pulled out in social media, he also says, the saints, we will continue to live the religion and observe the law of tithing. Joseph F. Smith does not say there's no more tithing. He says this, we expect to see the day when there's not another donation because we have tithes sufficient. So the person posting this has taken it out of context. They're messing with you. They have turned it into an announcement that there's no more tithing, when the text itself is saying we're still paying tithing. But what's Joseph F. Smith actually talking about? Well, you remember there were all those other things they were asking church members to pay. Their local budget, their missionaries, their utilities. You had to pay membership dues to be in Relief Society. We're doing fundraisers. You're building your own chapels. In 1907, all of those things are what church members have to do. And Joseph F. Smith is saying, if we live the law of tithing, then we're not going to have to ask you for any of that other stuff. That's the way God is set up to run the kingdom. And so this address is not an announcement that there's no more tithing, but it is a prophecy that we will eventually get to a day where we can do all that the Lord expects us to do by using tithing, the law that he created for us. And so rather than misreading this, we can actually read it as this is how God will build his kingdom, that he has laws and processes, and he will use this. The part we didn't get to share, I'll make it as the teaser for the BYU Studies article. There is a part of the article which is a case study that walks through how to find out more about, and it goes through a process, and it uses these categories of finding an answer for the fine that the church paid a few years ago for the Securities and Exchange Commission. If you can't wait 2 more weeks for BYU Studies to come out, this is also a learning module that I helped create for the MCOM classes in the School of Business. So if you've had MCOM or you have a friend in MCOM, you can see a little bit of it there. But thank you for being here today, coming out on a Thursday. I want to just conclude with these thoughts. I hope the process that I shared with you will help you think about answers, help you seek answers, help you find the answers that you need, and be ready to help people who come to you with questions, because that's what the latter days are about. False prophets, false preachers, false ideas. We just call it misinformation and disinformation and YouTube and whatever, but that's the world we live in, and it's not going to change. You are going to pull out your phone to watch a General Conference video, and whatever app you're using, there will be an algorithm that will say, why don't you take a look at this ex-Mormon content or this antagonistic site or whatever. That's just the reality. And so we need to be able to think about the things that we encounter so that we can be disciples of Jesus Christ and follow his Spirit and survive in these last days. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.